President Trump, who, by the way, today appointed a new national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, says he will order the Treasury Department to substantially increase sanctions against the rogue country. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is headed to the Middle East for a series of meetings about Iran. Now, the secretary says he'll first head to Saudi Arabia, where he's going to be meeting with the country's crown prince. They're going to be discussing the oil field attack in Saudi Arabia and also evaluating evidence that sure does indicate Iran was behind that attack. In fact, seems like all global intelligence players feel Iran was responsible, indirectly, if not directly. Now, President Trump maintains that Iran was behind the incident, but Iran, well, they've denied being behind that oil field attack. Now, this all comes as the New York Times has new photos that show the strike did, in fact, come from the northeast, which means it was launched from either Iran or Iraq. Now, here are some of the photos. And officials say they have evidence the attack by a combination of both drones and guided cruise missiles. So let's unpack all this. Welcome in our next guest, Jessie Duff, 20-year Marine Corps veteran and a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, and also my good friend, Jessie. Good to see you.
Good to see you, John.
So, Jessie, I have had military experts on the show. I've had Bernie Kerik, who was the Interior Minister of Iraq and the NYPD Commissioner on 9/11, Scott Eulinger, CIA Station Chief. Conventional wisdom is Iran was absolutely behind this, and in all probability, this was launched by Shia groups out of Iraq. Do you share that sentiment? Do you agree with that analysis?
Of course, all bad things that happen in the Middle East are tied to Iran. It essentially is always the case. They have been the number one they back all terrorism that's going on in the Middle East. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi rebels in Yemen. There is not one grade of this that doesn't tie back to Iran. The Shias in Iraq have already been infiltrated by the Iranians. They've already infiltrated into the Iraqi government. We know that there's a heavy influence of Iran in Iraq. All of the efforts we have made in Iraq have often been pretty much put on derailment by the Iranian officials that are working there. They have influence in Syria. Everywhere you go throughout the Middle East, Iran's footprint is everywhere, and now their fingerprints are all over this.
Okay, so what's our move here? Where Saudi Arabia is not going to take any military action. Mitt Romney said it's not our responsibility, that Saudi Arabia should take military action on their own. But they're not going to, because their military hardware they get from us, our advisors are there. We train them, we evaluate their tactics, their strategies, so they're going to wait for us. Are we going to move militarily here in a limited fashion, special operations, against the IRGC, or are we just going to continue the sanctions?
Well, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is obviously a great threat to all of our partners in the Middle East. However, military action would not be the only option on the table. We can also ensure that we have cyber attacks, which the president has mentioned. There are also other avenues that we can approach with the sanctions. But the key thing here that you have to understand is that everybody knows that Iran is trying to gain the sympathy also of the European allies that they still have. Because when Saudi oil prices start skyrocketing, it impacts the Europeans. The U.S. is now the number one producer in the world of oil. So, and this has been like that since 2018. So it's not impacting us as much as it will be our European allies. So they're trying to get any measure of support from the outside world so that everybody will come running back to the table at this nuclear capability. Some people try to say that that's a flag. No, think about 9/11. We just had our 18th anniversary of that. Next time, it would not necessarily be planes. It could be atomic weapons, because these people are ruthless and want to see the death to Israel and the death to the United States. So why would we want them to have any capacity of nuclear weapons? And the president fully understands that. Yeah.
No, I'm with you there. I mean, this is the last country in the history of this planet that should ever have nuclear weapons. Let's talk a little bit about the president's new pick for National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. I'm hearing good things about him. I'm hearing that he is ideologically in line with the president. They have very similar views on Iran. People I tremendously respect are just over the moon about this choice. They couldn't be happier. What's your take on it?
I don't know much about him. I did know a lot about John Bolton, and I understand that they had come to an impasse, and that's why he's no longer there. But this new the new advisor appears to have very favorable reviews, but that doesn't necessarily mean much. I felt McMaster was a disaster. It rhymes, and he really did not do well for the president. But
Jessie, McMaster was really a disciple of the Obama foreign policy doctrine. What I'm hearing from people close to O'Brien is that he's a true disciple of the Trump doctrine, that they're much more ideologically aligned.
And that's where the key pivot is, and that's what I was going to say, is that he's already aligned with the president. So ideologically, we know that he's against the problems that we're having with Iran. He understands that the Obama administration essentially had funneled and funded the terrorism that they went on to demonstrate throughout the world. He understands that we cannot allow our ally Israel to ever be compromised by the threats of Iran. He understands all of the problems that we have on the table with the Taliban in Afghanistan, all the way to the Shia influence in Iraq. This is incredible to have somebody that understands what the president has been advocating on and has not changed his position on since he ran for president. Often we have seen some of these never-Trumpers wiggle their way in there, and we're all sitting back shocked, like, how did they get the job?
Right.
But now we have someone that actually supports the president. So I think my gut tells me this is an excellent choice. I'm looking forward to seeing great progress and seeing that the president is able to make very good decisions based upon the information that his advisors do provide for him.
Yeah, I'm just waiting, unfortunately, for the smear pieces on the guy from the New York Times, from the Washington Post, from CNN, because they're doing it to everybody, right? Look, I want to talk to you about this. They did it again to Brett Kavanaugh. This thinly, I don't even want to say thinly sourced, this non-sourced piece, because when the guy, when your only source is a guy who was Bill Clinton's defense lawyer, when Ken Starr was looking into Bill Clinton for exposing himself to women and doing, well, things we can't talk about on air with an intern in the White House and lying to the U.S. people about it, the U.S. citizens about it, this guy effectively lost to Brett Kavanaugh when Brett Kavanaugh was a prosecutor on Starr's team. Now, 30 years later, this guy with an axe to grind comes out of the woodwork.
Exactly.
Despite 6 other people, Jesse, saying never happened, including the alleged victim. The New York Times, even when the Washington Post didn't.
And what's so upsetting, and you're on Twitter like I am,
when
we see it trending that Kavanaugh has more sexual assault allegations out there. But we don't see it trending when the New York Times is called out for falsifying a story. That's what's so upsetting to me. And I mean, I belong to a lot of websites where I have to go through them as a search engine, and the first thing that populates for their news story is Kavanaugh's allegations. Never once have they come out and said exactly what you said right now. So the public gets really misinformed. And if you're on your face not knowing what's actually going on, you're like, man, maybe this guy did lie. You don't understand that this has, again, been a coup by the left to undermine this president. If they couldn't get him on the election, the Supreme Court justice, make no mistake, this isn't about Kavanaugh himself. This is about the Second Amendment rights that are now going up in front of the Supreme Court, and there are about 4 cases that we know the left will probably
that's
lose
all it's
on.
about.
And it's also about abortion and freedom of speech. They want to suppress your freedom of speech. They want to make sure they can abort babies, and not just abort infanticide, legalize. I mean, Kavanaugh is basically a threat to their insanity because he is a voice of sanity. He's a reasonable man.
But Jesse, the most disturbing part of this was that it wasn't fact checkers at the New York Times. It wasn't editors at the New York Times. They're the ones who buried the exculpatory information on Kavanaugh. It was Molly Hemingway at the Federalist. She was the one who spoke to people and spoke to various people who spoke to various outlets who denied the events in the story or said they had no recollection. The New York Times is saying, well, we reached out to some people, but they refused to give any details.
It.
Yep.
She found it. Molly Hemingway found it. You know, this goes to show you God puts you where you're supposed to be. Sometimes you don't know why you're there. And had she not already written this book, had she not already done this research, there would not have necessarily been this discovery till long past the train has already left the station. She stopped the train. It never left the station. The horse never left the barn. And you have horses, so you know how wild they can get. She knew. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, it takes people like a Molly Hemingway and all the voices out there that find those basically make an entire unsubstantiated case collapse. The New York Times should be ashamed of itself. It should come out with an apology, but we won't see that. Instead, you and I got to see it trending on Twitter till it goes away. And I can only imagine what was happening on Facebook.
Why aren't there editors fired? Why isn't there ombudsman fired? Why aren't there fact checkers fired? Why do these people still have jobs? This was journalistic malpractice.
It's stunning. And this has been going on for the last 2.5 years.
Yep.
Let's just go look at CNN and how they've hired McCabe, a man that's under investigation. Look how they let Brennan stay on the payrolls after all of the fake dossier information has come out. When you look at what's actually going on by these news networks, they're not trying to find the facts for the case. They're trying to find a case that they can try to present. That's what they're trying to do. And then they're going to try to make a case. They're not trying to go after information where you research it and find out I have no story. They're making a story and getting all of this other, what they claim to be implications or evidence to create something against it. They're doing character assassination at the top level. I'll tell you what's going to happen is a lot of the good-hearted Democrats out there, people on the left, people who are moderates,
and
people who have never voted before,
the independents,
and the independents. Yep. They're coming out. I was in a briefing today where down in North Carolina, one of the congressmen was walking through the line, and there were so many people in that line who said they had never voted before. Don't ever underestimate the American people. They see what's going on.
You know what bothers
me? And the pollsters want to say.
Right. Well, and then the New York Times starts crying when people like you and I go after them, and especially when the president goes after them. But he's right. Look at what the president tweeted after this new Kavanaugh junk story. He tweeted, quote, "The New York Times is now blaming an editor for the horrible mistake they made in trying to destroy or influence," and I believe influence, very important, Jesse, "to destroy or influence Justice Brett Kavanaugh. It wasn't the editor. The Times knew everything. They are sick and desperate, losing in so many ways." The president's right. That's why they're hysterical at the New York Times, because he's got their number and he's calling them out dead on accurately.
And I would say to all the people out there, I hear people say, well, you know, I'm uncomfortable with his tweets. I want you to go back now and realize that if the president hadn't been making his tweets, none of this would have gotten out. The president has a way of being very fortuitous. He puts a tweet out there, gets the left all stirred up, and guess what ends up happening? He ends up being right. Give it 48 hours, people. He always ends up being right. Such as when he, when he called it rat-infested Baltimore. Guess what happened? Within 24 hours, a tape of doggone Elijah Cummings saying it's rat-infested Baltimore surfaces. Also, when Frank Luntz tried to say, well, he would never call anybody a Lily White place rat-infested or infested, New Hampshire 2017, the president said, we have drug-infested New Hampshire. So he throws it out there. He knows what he's doing, and then they all try to pile on and make complete fools of themselves. If it weren't for Twitter, if it weren't for him being able to do this quick reaction messaging, we would be living in the dark wondering, we would have been sitting back and just like George Bush would have let it go and hoped it goes away, and it would have festered and festered till it would have collapsed his presidency.
I say that all the time. George Bush, patriotic man, loved America. I agreed with him. I disagreed with him.
But didn't punch back.
He let that press destroy him. He kept people like Helen Thomas in that front row getting that first question.
Front chair.
Every press conference started off negatively with him, his administration, his family being insulted. And they said, what? It's tradition. Tradition can't touch it.
And it poisoned him.
Poisoned his entire presidency.
And it allowed it. And it set a precedence that we're now trying to conquer today.
That's right.
President Trump has to hold these folks accountable, and they're so offended that they're being called fake news. But if they would get off their rears and own up to all of the misinformation they have sent out to us, then maybe they would succeed again. Even the New York Times said we failed on the last election because we didn't have enough people out there in the field, out of the bubble. But obviously, they didn't have any sincerity with it. They still are doing the same business as usual.
Yeah, I think they mean they failed because they couldn't get Hillary elected. That's what I think they really meant.
That's what they really meant.
They failed. Jessie Jane Duff, always great to see you, my friend. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great day.